I'm very happy to be here today in Melbourne and present to you this paper about exophonic poets in contemporary Italy, which has been a part of my PhD, which I completed last year at the University of Sydney. So I will just speak in my talk today about this phenomenon of exophony. We'll define the notion of exophony from a theoretical point of view, and then I will zoom on the Italian literary field, and then I will focus on the poetry of Barbara Pimosel, who is an exophonic Italian author, and examine it as a case studies. First of all, what is exophony? This is quite an obscure word. So, according to Chantal Wright, who is one of the first details mapped the notion, the development of the notion, in an article in 2008 that is called Writing in a Graying Zone. The notion of exophony has circulated first in French and in German scholarship in particular to describe African literatures that were written in European languages. So it was in a post-colonial discourse that this kind of term arose, and then slowly went to indicate a precise kind, let's say, of writing. So in this context, the exophonic writer Tawada Yoko, that you see here, who is a Japanese writer, originally Japanese, that moved to Germany as an adult and started writing and publishing in German. Tawada wrote the Kleist Prize in 2016, so he's now a quite known author in Germany. She adopted this term for the first time as a title for a collection of essays, and then started to widely use this notion to allude to her own writing, or however to allude to indicate the writing outside of one's mother tongue. So an effective definition of exophony can be found in Chantal Wright's introduction to an English edition of Portrait of a Tongue, that is one of Tawada's most disseminated work. And I quote Wright, "Exophony describes the phenomenon where a writer adopts a literary language other than his on her mother tongue, entirely replacing or complementing his or her native language as a vehicle of literary expression. The adopted language is typically acquired as an adult. Exophonic writers are not bilingual in the sense that they grew up speaking two languages, and indeed do not necessarily achieve the type of spoken fluency associated with the term bilingualism." So, the component of exophony would be, first, a distance. So, getting into a language as adults. We will see this in Pimosel in particular, what it means. And this idea of speaking from the outside. To this, I would add two more components, as they emerge from scholarship and for further investigation of exophony. The second component, movement, so is related to a movement, a migration. A movement occurred through space. In poetry writing, this is really important because versification, the process somehow of constructed lines, has been paired with physical movement, so it's particularly significant for this literary genre. And then exophony, why this word? Because this word carries on a relation, or wants to carry on a relation, to stylistic innovation. Wright herself clarifies the rationale of having a stylistic approach whilst examining an exophonic text, or introducing exophony as a word, and I quote Wright, "In focusing on style and on how meaning is generated by it, the term exophonic represents an important shift in how we approach writing by non-native speakers, and a return to a somewhat neglected relationship between form and meaning in literature. So in using this term, there is this desire of reconciliation between form and meaning, which is crucial in poetry in particular. Let's see what happens in the Italian literary field. So, where is exophony in the Italian literary field? Well, as we know very well, Italy has had a massive wave of migration that changed her face from an immigration to an immigration country in the 1970s and 1980s in particular, if we are speaking about the last century. This massive wave produced of people that moved to Italy as adults, so first generation migrants, produced a generation of exophonic Italian writers. So writers who arrived in Italy in their adult life and who started to use Italian in their creative productions. As you might know, whilst narratives in general collected a quite attention, especially at the beginning, poetry somehow collected less attention. So there were very few studies on this author and on other authors when I started to explore the field. And this was despite an impressive flourishing of poetic texts that were amassing, let's say, in a minor area of the Italian literary field. So, amongst this generation of Italian writers that migrated to Italy during the 70s and the 80s, there is Barbara Pümhosel. Barbara Pümhosel was born in Austria in 1959 and moved to Italy in 1988. She settled in Bagno a Ripoli, that is near Florence, where she currently lives and works. Prugni, that is one of the collection we are exploring today, the poetry collection, is her first exophonic poetic collection, which is followed by In Transitu, issued Prugni in 2008 and In Transitu in 2016. So they both represent somehow the result of many years of exophonic writing for Pümhosel and two different stages of this writing. But Pümhosel works covers other literary genres, including essay, research, narrative, performative poetry, and children's literature. She is a quite renowned author of childhood stories. Pümhosel also writes in German, so she's somehow developed her literary career in the two languages. The tropes in her poetry are, as we will see, language. So she reflects in her verse about language in a very crucial way, and a focus on transformation. So we can say that Pümhosel verse not only engages with movement, but it's shaped by her movement between spaces and languages. So we have said that through the notion of exophony, we wish to orient our analysis towards style and somehow reconcile form and meaning. In particular, we would like to see what innovative and mobilizing elements Pümhosel's exophonic diction brings into Italian poetry and into Italian language as well. So, in classical stylistics theorization from Barthes to Contini and Mechonic, the form of the poem, again, the agglomeration of the sense on the page, corresponds somehow to a subjective historical idea of the word. So, in Pümhosel's case, movement through language and space impacts on forms and consequently, as we will see, contributes to shaping an idea of the word which is entirely based on mobile and hybrid imagery. Furthermore, Pümhosel explicitly pinpoints the function of physical movement through space in enacting somehow and broadening knowledge. And I quote from a short story of Pümhosel that alludes to this ability of movement to enhance knowledge. Sembrava che gli stanziali, quelli non costretti a migrare, a fuggire, a rischiare, con la rinuncia al movimento avessero perso anche la consapevolezza della propria mortalità. I suoi compagni di viaggio, invece, ne erano stati consapevoli in ogni momento. Andandosene, portò dentro di sé per farle rinascere un giorno le storie raccolte, le voci silenziose di vite interrotte, quelle che non avrebbero avuto una seconda occasione. So, although a first transnational phenomenology of exophonic writing has still to be compiled, Wright highlighted some foregrounding characteristics of exophonic writing in Germanophone contexts, which we can use as a good point of departure for our formal analysis of Pimoso's work. For example, in the works of Flavio Biondi, she reads an excess of metaphors as a foregrounding characteristics connected to the practice of exophony. And we can trace in Pimosel this kind of excess of metaphorization in interpreting movement and in embodying mobility and, let's say, universal connectedness through verse. So let's trace this trope of movement through different layers of diversification components in the two collections, in Pruni and in Transito. So the first characteristics that I would like to point out that is somehow depends on these relations that Pimosel has with the new language is somehow the semantic tensions embodied in the textual space itself. So in the first text that I read for you, we will see how the textual space itself embodies this tension between human and non-human, which is one, again, of the tropes of Pimosel poetry. So, sotto la pergola, un ramo ha puntato la sua foglia rossa sangue a 5 punte contro la mia gola, mentre, alzandomi, stavo per pensare le solite cose sulle foglie che muoiono. So, this kind of capsizing of the power relation between human and non-human is inscribed in, let's say, textual space itself, and Pimosel stresses that this aspect is depending on her relation with the new language as well. So we can say, I will skip unfortunately the other two tests, but let's say that verse acquire dynamism and active force. Pimosel also used widely steps or hybrid poses like slash and dashes, so has this kind of dynamic force in her verse. Here is an example, I might read it quickly, of verticalization of the text. I read, sono stufa di vedere Eva che morde la mela sotto lo sguardo del serpente. Eva che quadro dopo quadro viene ricacciata dal paradiso. Vorrei vederla seduta sul ramo più alto del melo con le gambe penzoloni. Vorrei vederla sorridere mentre prepara una torta di mele o ancora mentre cantando pianta i semi. So, somehow the verticalization of text follows Eve climbing up on the tree and her progressive empowerment and her breaking up of the stereotype. So this tells you something on how exophonic diction is inscribed materially on the page. I go on quickly because I see I'm a bit late. So let's go to another layer of this kind of focus of trope of movement within Pimosel poetry, that is what I call the transitional imagery in Pruni. So in Pimosel's work, verse is pointed to, again, highlighting and inhabiting this gray zone. So there is, let's say, an excess, an abundance of imagery related to transformation and matter caught in perpetual transition. So rhetorically, the figures which dominate the diction are the typical transformative figures, personifications and metamorphoses. I will read a couple of that in the first two sets of examples. So, i viticci di una vicia selvatica mi riconoscono come un possibile sostegno a cui allacciarsi, so personifications, we go on. La grappa di prugne conserva di ogni frutto la biografia e brucia dalla voglia di raccontarle. And the third one, sul tetto basso della rimessa in cui le slitte aspettano l'inverno. As an example of metamorphosis, so this kind of exchange between human and not human, and especially between, we will see, the poet and the environment. Quando sto per inciambellarmi e coprirmi con la coda, l'odore di terra svanisce e io so che devo aprire gli occhi e smettere di essere volpe. E poi ho ingoiato un nocciolo e subito l'ho dimenticato, ma ora di notte le mie braccia diventano rami e i piedi radici. This is a literary trope, but again, there is this kind of abundance in Pimosel's verse, this imagery, and I read an example from In Transito. Fino all'imbrunire con polpastrelli ghiaccioli ho continuato a tracciare orme di scoiattolo sulla neve. In Pimosel's work, the process of transformation and plastic reformulation of matter as an effect of polysensoriality in her verse and extreme relationality of her gaze overcomes the human-non-human dichotomy and extends to display the transitions between different species, different forms, and different elements. Negro, Grazia Negro, who studied Pimosel's work, speaks about an interchangeability of objects and various aspects of reality, and I would elaborate on these to individuate a focus on the changing nature of reality itself, determined again by the physical movement of Pimosel within spaces and languages. I just give you some example. Le prugne non raccolte marciscono. We go in the last one, the last transformation. Un'ortensia per un chiodo arrugginito cambia colore. And I come to a third, unfortunately I don't have time to read it all. I come to the third component that I wanted to show you, that is the discourse on language and language itself within Pruni and In Transito. So, language of Pruni and In Transito is highly mobile. There are German and multilingual inserts, there is a play on compound words, there is a lot of scientific and botanical vocabulary, a lot of use of plain vocabulary in combination with highly canonized lines, like in the syllabus, so it's a very interesting and rich vocabulary. Exophony allows Pimosel to perceive, to have a peculiar relation with language and to perceive in particular and sense the material components of language itself, and so to mobilize through this second language diction the relationship between signifier and signified. Pimosel herself stresses these aspects. I just read from an interview in Sagarana, the first passage. Nella lingua straniera c'è una parola che ha un suono preciso, bello, che suggerisce qualcosa che magari è tutto il contrario del suo significato reale, ma finché non lo cerco nel dizionario ho tutta una serie di immagini di quello che per me potrebbe essere. Io sento una parola e dal suono la collego a un'immagine e prima di imparare cosa davvero vuol dire posso anche toccare quella parola come un oggetto da guardare che mi suggerisce delle cose che poi non sono. So this kind of imagery, this kind of idea of manipulating, physically manipulating language is typical of other exophonic writers. So I just quote, sorry I don't have time for the second quote, Tawada Yoko again, with a similar discourse on mother tongue and second language writing. And I read the first quote. In the mother tongue, words are attached to people so that one cannot playfully enjoy language. There, thoughts cling so closely to words that neither the former nor the latter can fly freely. In a foreign language, however, one has something like a staple remover. It removes all things that are attached to each other and cling to one another. So I find this quite similar to Pimosel's discourse. And we come back to and I conclude couple of minutes, okay, and again, this idea that is also in Vorzi. So Vorzi speaks about second language as a language without childhood, and I read just the first line. Per scrivere avevo bisogno di una lingua che non portasse in sé l'infanzia, e per me l'italiano è una lingua senza infanzia. And this is also an imagery that is close to what exophonic poets do. So quickly, how Pimosel interprets language within her own poetry. So for her is a playful tool, as we have seen. Not only it participates to the development of the transhuman gaze through frequent metapoetic, metalinguistic tropes and animations. Okay, so we have seen the transformation leads to this kind of transhuman gaze on things. And I read just quickly some examples of animation of language. Morta l'idea, ma nel cestino vivi scarti diversi. This is an haiku. And then the last one, la poesia mi salta addosso quando sto per metterla nella lavastoviglie. So, in this text there is this idea of being written, being submerged and dominated by language. Words, line and verses acquire autonomous force and figurative value, and in some cases they are the results of mechanical, scientific, of natural processes rather than intellectual processes. The poet's role is consequently frequently questioned, and she's at times a simple passeur, she's an artisan, she's a scientist, and eventually she's an animal who uses poetry to eat and finally survive in this last poetry. So the bat is, let's say, paired to the image of the poet. And I conclude. So Brian Moore, in Ecology and Literature, argued that personification and transitional figures can be seen as environmental figures, which may consequently convey anti-anthropocentric directions and stances. In Pimoso's poetics, this function is taken on by the full set of translational and transitional imagery and metalinguistic discourse, which aims to highlight contact, transition, universal openness, and idea of coexisting or co-becoming with the environment. The author gets to this reflection through her experience of migrating through space and changing the language for her creative productions, thus patiently acquiring a new language and undergoing a destruction and progressive reconstruction on a different basis of her poetic language. This process can be painful, although for Pimoso it changes the nature and becomes, first and foremost, a new way of seeing and a chance to free her writing and to reconnect to it in a primeval gesture of wonder. This contributes to build an idea of the world in which movement and mobility, crucial actors in contemporary poetics, eventually take on a formal and semantic level the center of the scene. Thank you very much.
Thank you.